All right, all right, all right. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. So, hopefully, everyone is having a wonderful morning. So, welcome to our King Drew family. That's in our webinar, our alumni family, our extended family. I hope you all enjoy all of the wonderful panelists that we have today for you all. So, I'm gonna share my screen. All right. All right, so welcome everyone to Approaching 40 Years of Excellence, our King Drew Legacy panel. All right, and so the highlighted people are not the only important figures that helped establish the King Drew known today, but they are an invaluable resource in the early structural development of the programs essential to our legacy. In the midst of a pandemic and societal upheavals, I feel like it's even more important to rediscover and recover the history in our communities and especially that of our high school. All right, so we're going to be this panel is going to be moderated by myself and
Brandon Sankara.
all right, and so we are both King Drew alums. We are both students of the school that were shaped so much by the early parts of King Drew. All right, so we're going to introduce our panel today. So for our panelists, please just give us your name, your title when you were at King Drew, and how long you worked at King Drew. So let's start with Miss Malbrough.
Yes, I'm Edna Malbrough. I was at King Drew from 1986 to 2005. My job was magnet coordinator.
Nice. All right, and then we have Miss Shirley Starke-Wallace.
My name was Miss Shirley Starke-Wallace, and I was there to start the school when it first opened at the site right next to Drew University, 1984, and I was there for 10 years to 1994 and served as the first principal of King Drew Medical Magnet High School.
Yes, 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 yes. And then we have Dr. Schumer.
He may be on mute.
Let's see. Let's see.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
My name's Rob Shumer. I was a doctoral student at UCLA and worked at King Drew from 82 to 86. And I was involved in helping to develop the connections with the medical center.
All right. And then we have Dr. Bloom.
Muted, Ron. Muted. Okay.
Ron Bloom. I was a physician at the hospital and on the faculty of the medical school, and was an associate professor of pediatrics and president of the creation, starting about 1980, and had some affiliation until I left.
I can't hear.
Until I left the university in 1992.
All right. Thank you. And Mr. Siegel.
Yes, hi, I'm Steve Siegel, and I was hired by Shirley Stark in 1985, and I was the English teacher there for the first 24 years or so, and then I also taught English and was part of the hospital careers program for the last 7 years, and I retired in 2016.
Beautiful. All right. So let's just jump right in. Brandon, I think you're going to lead us off, right?
Right on, right on.
All right. Uh-oh. Gets the right part. There we go.
All right, so we get to start with one of my favorite teachers at King Drew. My AP English Lit teacher from senior year 2007, Mr. Steven Siegel, KD English teacher from 1985 to 2016. So before I was born to after I graduated. Just for your context out there, folks. So, Mr. Siegel, please tell them a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with King Drew. How did the story begin?
Well, thank you. Part of King Drew, of course, was that no one had any idea what the school was or where. And I had come back to Los Angeles. I had been brought up here. I went to Fairfax High School, and then I was looking for an English position, and just by accident heard of King Drew as I was sitting downtown at the Shirley Stark happened to call while I was being interviewed, and I went immediately to the campus thinking that Lincoln Elementary School on 118th Street had to be the school, because I passed it. I didn't even see it because it was bungalows, as you guys know. And I ultimately went into the office at Lincoln Elementary, and they told me, no, 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 it's across the street. And I still couldn't see it because it was so small. Um, I finally did find it, of course, and went in. And from that day on, Shirley Stark's vision, as well as Sweet Alice Harris, all of the ideas about King Drew started to emerge, even though the campus was so small that we were very much affiliated with Charles Drew University as well as the medical center. At the time, the General Hospital's Hudson Auditorium, which is on the Wilmington side of the campus of the medical center, was our auditorium. There was, instead of the Allied Health Building in Charles Drew, there was an open field with one, I believe, apricot tree, tall grasses. I would take the first students there to kind of commune with nature. And we would see red-tailed hawks flying over that area, parrots, and we would write haikus. So we needed to use even the open land. At the same time, once the Allied Health Building was built, that's where we would try to sometimes use it for our AP exams. We had to walk over because there was really no place at such a small campus. We had basically a half basketball court. That was the entire PE area. And as Ms. Stark could tell you, we had no PE teacher. We all, during our conference periods, had to take over PE. Also, just because I love basketball, I ended up playing continuously. And I remember every lunch I had to play. We also did a little coaching. We did basketball. We ultimately had a volleyball team, which I coached both boys and girls. But all of us had to wear a lot of hats. You had to be the yearbook sponsor and the senior sponsor, as well as the coach, as well as activities. So we all were engaged in trying to create a high school experience without really having an environment that was conducive to all these things. We ultimately had to kind of expand our notions of not only the medical program, but also the cultural program. So we ultimately were engaged in finding relationships with the music center downtown, theaters throughout Los Angeles. And our students began to explore science project learning as well. And so we were always committed to humanities, the liberal arts, and included the medical world. In the 90s, I know that a wonderful teacher, Miss Magruder, and Mr. Webb and I went to the Rand Corporation for a summer to build more curriculum that Robert Schumer started in the 80s to try to develop ways in which students could write, let's say, more authentically about their experiential learning. And so we were constantly trying to create more possibilities and don't get me wrong, we had 220 students each year. And so our graduating classes were 40, 50, sometimes they started out in the 30s. And we would have our graduations at the tennis courts at the INR building across the street, which is on the southeast corner of the Watts Compton Ave, 120th and Compton Avenue. We had graduations, our entire graduation and all the families, we could literally place on 2 tennis courts that are no longer there, but were there in 1985 through 89, 90. And Ms. Turner could probably share some of those early experiences. Finally, I think that transition to the large school changed, and I know that Ms. Stark and then Dr. Ernie Roy really helped prepare the expansion of the school. So it could not just simply be a medical magnet, but it had to be a medical or medicine and science magnet. And we're beginning to develop other approaches and ways for all kinds of students to deal not only with science and all the other courses that needed to be taken to really get into a variety of college programs, but to also establish more opportunities, because instead of having 10 teachers or and maybe one counselor, we ultimately had 13 English teachers in one department. We'd have 60 something teachers, and they all had to kind of buy into the power of this school that really started with experiential learning. And I'm really glad that even though I retired in 2016, that it seems to be continuing, and that this commitment not only to science but also to social justice issues, which always was a part of the school, continues to this day. So I'm very appreciative of my time at King Drew and all the different work that we were able to accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. All right, so Brandon, let's start us off one more time, please.
All right, moving on next to Dr. Ronald Bloom, Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Charles Drew's Postgraduate Medical School from 1971 to 1992. Dr. Bloom, can you give a short origin history of the hospital program? And, being that it's such a, you could say, avant-garde concept to have an internship program ingrained in the curriculum of the school, why was this sort of experiential learning integrated into the curriculum? Oh, and I think you're still muted, sir.
Be glad to. Let me start out with a short history. A longer and more detailed history will occur in the next session, but also to talk about why experiential learning was incorporated into the school curriculum. The origins of the school came when 3 organizations in 1980 outlined the problems of Watts 15 years after the riots of '65. And amongst other things, they talked about jobs and schools. Asked what I thought, I said it was nice, but what good will it do? What is going to be done? They turned the question around on me and said, what would you do? I knew I couldn't avoid that question, so I asked for some time, came back in 2 weeks, and I returned with a concept: an academic school integrating a very strong experiential component. And this was driven by 2 thoughts. 1, provide a quality education to inner city kids, and they can learn and they can be highly competitive. And 2nd, experiential learning can expand the understanding of options that a student may have and the development of networks leading to the ability to access what they want to do. The organizations that wrote the original report took the responsibility for getting the school board to approve the school. I was responsible for crafting the educational components of the school. I was acutely aware of the fact that I was completely unqualified to actually do what they was asking me to do. So I wrote a grant to request some money to hire someone who I could lean on to help. With funding from the grant, we were able to hire Rob Shumer. He was an accomplished expert in experiential education. The school was started in very, very modest circumstances, as they said, with 2 bungalows, 2 teachers, part-time at Jordan. And after a couple of very difficult years, Shirley Starke joined us. What the 2 of them did was to develop a school in which the worksite experiences were integrated into the academic curriculum. Rob and Shirley will talk more about that. What do you need to do to make the most of a worksite experience? When you approach a worksite experience, we wanted you to broaden your thinking from just observation or doing rote tasks. Think about what is being done. Why is it being done? What are the elements that are required to come together to make it possible to do what the worksite is doing? What underwrites the science, the finances, the funding, the administrative organizations for what is being done? All of these provide opportunities for a career. And most importantly, for whom is it being done? And how did they come to need the product of the worksite? How can your academic studies bring an understanding to what you are doing or observing? And reverse, how can the worksite experience bring a broader understanding to the academic classes you are taking? And to really make the most of the experience, we were hoping you to develop a relationship with whomever is mentoring you, because that individual, if they look upon you favorably and you've done a good job, will be available to assist you in understanding your options and how to access. And finally, in the context of history, the person who made it possible for you to be here is Shirley Stark. She came on board at a time of real difficulty and became the driving force behind the real success of the school in the 10 years she was the principal. She was the one who championed the building of the school you are in now, and she sold it to the school board. She was the heart and soul of this school. Without her, things would have been very different in the first 10 years, if indeed the school would have even survived, for prior to her coming, when things looked very grim.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bloom. That was amazing. That was amazing. Okay. Whew. All right. Let's go deeper into this King Drew story. I'm learning so much more. All right. So now we have Dr. Robert Shumer. He was a graduate student and assistant director or director of field studies at UCLA from 1982 to 1992. So my question to you, Dr. Shumer, is what is experiential learning?
So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but what I wanted to focus on was when I started my graduate program, I had experience in the 1970s actually running an alternative program in a high school where my students spent about 70% of their time, 60% of the time actually in the community doing their academic studies. As an example, I had a kid who wanted to be a veterinarian. She spent 3 full days a week at an animal shelter and worked with veterinarians. And so she studied about animal physiology and the history of animals and all of those kinds of things. And there was this movement called experience-based career education in the 1970s. Happened all over the country, trying to integrate career exploration with academic learning and community involvement. And so I got to learn from that program. It was started in Far West Lab, actually in San Francisco. And so I had been involved with programs around the country. And when Ron came to UCLA and asked for some help, my chair knew that I had some experience. So that's how we got connected. And so when I had a chance to talk to Ron, we started to talk about what could we do to engage the kids to go across the street to actually spend time. And so we developed a model based on this experience-based career education, where kids would spend 3 hours a week in the 10th grade, a full day in the 11th grade, and a day and a half in the 12th grade, exploring careers. We were hoping for 4 careers in the 10th grade, 3 in the 11th, and 2 in the 12th. And while they were doing their career exploration, where the students would say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, we would hopefully get them into the hospital setting and start to talk about what kind of academic subjects can you actually study while you're learning about the career in the medical center. And so that's really where the strength of the program hopefully was developed. In the first couple of years, we developed about 90 different sites. And so we would go into a place like pulmonary functions, and so the kids could learn about x-rays and learn about pulmonary diseases. And we also noticed that there was a blood gas analyzer over in the corner, and we said, what can you learn about blood gases from using that machine? And so you could learn about pH, and you could learn about other things that were taught in a traditional class. So part of the goal of King Drew was to make an academic connection and get the kids involved in the community. And probably one of the better things that kids did in the first couple of years, when we first went to Jordan in the morning and then came back in the afternoon, was the kids, Jordan would actually provide the food from LA Unified, and they would bring it over to the bungalows for the kids to eat lunch. And the kids who were working with nutritionists and cardiologists in the hospital said, high fat, high salt diets aren't great for us. And yet the food we're getting has those components. And so the kids at King Drew actually petitioned the school district to change the food, and they were successful. And LA Unified actually started to bring over healthier foods. So that was a good example in the first couple of years of the kids being able to use their knowledge to make some kind of change to improve their own health. So maybe that's enough to say, but there were lots of programs in the 1970s that were doing experiential learning. What was different about Drew was that most of them were initiated by the school district, and they went out to the community to recruit places. What was unique about Drew was that we had a community agency, the King Drew Medical Center and the medical school, who came to the school district and said, we want to participate. And that made a whole difference in terms of our ability to work together. Maybe that's enough to say to get us started.
Awesome. That was awesome. So it's so awesome to hear that the faculty on the CDU campus and the staff on Martin Luther King's hospital staff, they petitioned to the school district to get King Drew started. So even hearing that, they really advocated for this school to be here, and that is so amazing, and that's why it's been so successful. All right, let's move on in as we get deeper and deeper into this King Drew history. So now it seems like here we have the star of the show, the person that everyone has been talking about, Miss Shirley Starke-Wallace, the first principal of King Drew from 1984 all the way till 1994. So she wrote a chapter in a book, and in that chapter, she has the development of the school's philosophy, so a development of King Drew's philosophy. And I found these 2 points to be really, really, really awesome. So to foster a school atmosphere characterized by the excitement of learning and attitudes of inquiry and discovery, as exemplified in the achievements of Dr. Charles R. Drew. And to cultivate and nurture in students the development of attitudes that reflect compassion and respect for all people, as was so clearly demonstrated in the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So, Ms. Starke-Wallace, can you just kind of expound upon this and what Drs. Charles Drew and Drs. Martin Luther King meant to King Drew and the legacy?
Definitely. I was very, very impressed with them as a result of having the experience of getting to meet both of them. And both of them played a very, very important part in my life. And as a result of the efforts that were done by the Los Angeles Charles Drew University and what was done by the Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital to help us, it helped me to implement the rules and regulations that I wanted to implement. And I was thinking later on, maybe one of the reasons I was selected was because of my experience as a counselor. And then my job just before coming to King Drew had been working as a counselor with all of the small elementary schools to encourage them to work with their students. And it helped me to implement my goals that I had to try to implement at King Drew as a result of my experience of what those gentlemen meant to me and what I needed to do to help students to uh, find out what their talents are and what they can become successful about. And as a result of all the work done by Mr. Schumer and Mr. Bloom, who were so helpful in every aspect of things that had to be accomplished at King Drew as a new principal and what we had to do, they really, really were tremendous in helping us to fulfill that specific requirement, both of what Drew stood for and what Martin Luther King stood for. And so those 2 programs really helped us to provide an enriched secondary education experience for students interested in the field of health and medicine. And our philosophy included the concept of community-based learning experiences, community service, and excellence in academic achievement. So I was very, very appreciative of those 2 gentlemen who did so much to help me implement what my new goal had to be. It was a very small school, But as a result of the things we were able to accomplish, as a result of Mr. Roy, who had always done such an outstanding job in getting students to do and participate in projects related to science, to the extent that one of our first compliments ended up with our students winning so many of the examples that they presented. And the one student who won for the national contest and was invited to England and also to Washington, D.C. to accept his uh, uh, acceptance as being the student who had won the award out of all the students in the US. And as a result, it ended up with us having the name of uh, our school, that we were also able to join an organization in which all schools with the name of Martin Luther King became an association, which also helped and provided experiences for our students, as well as for our school, as well as for the principal. So there were a number of things that went on to help us to finally, we feel, uh, achieve the goal that finally our success ended up in when in 1992, the University of California in Berkeley indicated that King Drew was one of 16 schools in the United States that had a program to help students consider what their job would become, as well as what their educational would become. And as a result, they recognized us for that. And then in 1993, the English students ended up uh, having the award for the second student school in the district. But in 1994, they ended up winning the award. And I was informed about that in 1995 as a result of what had happened when I was no longer at the school, but was so proud of what Mr. Siegel and the other English teacher had been able to do, so that King Drew in 1994 won the top award. And as a result of that, uh, even though I was no longer at the school, two things came up for me as well. I was invited that summer to come to Washington, D.C. to provide a workshop for the College of the American Vocational Association, and then later to write the chapter that I hope you guys were able to see regarding King Drew Medical Magnet. But all was based mainly on the work of Mr. Schumer and the work of Mr. Bloom to help us develop our program, and the outstanding work of our counselor, Mrs. Malbrough, and the outstanding work of Mr. Siegel, the outstanding work of our uh, social studies teacher, the outstanding work of our math teacher at King Drew, which in order enables students to become very, very successful and to implement the rules and regulations of Charles Drew and Martin Luther King.
Awesome. Wow. 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 Ooh, these stories. And I just love all of the gratitude that's being shown across this panel. Everyone is just so grateful for the other person that is coming up. And this King Drew legacy is amazing. All right, so let's move on to our last panelist for this third period. Brandon.
We are next moving on to Ms. Edna Marlborough, the magnet coordinator from 1989 to 2005, one who I had the pleasure of being on campus with. Yeah, she used to chase me around campus from time to time, but that's neither here nor there. So now, Ms. Marlborough, how were you able to create and maintain partnerships that supported the hospital program, and really, how were you able to get this buy-in from these doctors over at the hospital to allow these children to come over there to the hospital and work with them?
Well, thanks for having me. First, I'd like to say that those of you who put this program together today are just simply fantastic. I am so pleased to be a part of it and to share my experiences today. I'd like to start by saying my first summer in as my assignment as magnet coordinator was to go into the hospital and introduce myself to the supervisors that worked with the students. And I didn't have much more to go on, so I had to just try to figure out where things were because I had never actually been in the hospital. But Miss Stark is a woman who can convince you to walk on water if you have to. And she said, Miss Malbrough, you can do it. I said, Miss Stark, I don't have a science background. She said, you don't have to. So I took her at her word. I walked in that hospital during the summer of 1987. And I had a list of all of the hospital sites and their room numbers and the persons who, the supervisors who worked with the students. And Dr. Roy had left. The campus was empty, so it was only me. I didn't know these people, so I just walked in their offices or their sites and introduced myself as the person replacing Dr. Roy. And I would be working with them in the future. And I wanted them to know who I was. And I would be getting back to them because I knew eventually I had to work with all of these people to get these objectives done. And I'd like to send kudos to Dr. Schumer because having written all of these objectives for all of these sites was a humongous task. It had to have been. And he set the I guess the objectives for the program and actually put it into writing. So I was especially grateful to him. And to be honest, I've never really met Dr. Schumer. I've only heard of him. But that's what I did the first summer I went into the hospital. And how did I get other people to buy into the program? I went to Dr. Bloom and I sat down with Dr. Bloom and he explained to me how the school got started, the role that Sweet Alice played, the role that he played by actually going into classrooms in Compton, because the school is actually in the Compton School District, but it was supported financially by LA Unified School District. But Dr. Bloom explained this to me, and when Compton didn't act on the school, LA Unified School District did, because Dr. Bloom wrote a grant and got money from the Robert Wood Foundation, which started the school. So Dr. Alexander, who was over the magnet program, put the money in place to get the school started with the few bungalows, one or two bungalows. I wasn't there at the very beginning, so I don't know. But I was able to get references from supervisors in the hospital of people who actually wanted to work with the kids. And that's a testament to the kids themselves, because they went in the hospital, and for the most part, kids are going to be kids. But for the most part, they did what they had to do. They enjoyed what they were doing. Because they were considered the best of the best, they were able to talk to the supervisors, ask questions, and many of the offices approached me about wanting kids to work with them. The Department of Pediatrics was exceptionally supportive of our program, because Dr. Schlegel, who was head of that department, made sure that our kids were given their TB test every year, because no one could go in the hospital without having been tested and the test read. And many of the students probably may not have had insurance. Their mothers couldn't take off to take them to the doctor, but that's where the hospital stepped in. And they actually, Dr. Shack's pediatric department provided the space. And we coordinated the time for the students to take the test and the time for them to return to get their test read. So the hospital supported us in every way that they could. I remembered the administrator, Mr. Delgado, who provided the space at the hospital for our graduation. And they helped some of the site supervisors actually helped purchase lab coats for the kids because everybody couldn't afford them. And because they were like kids do, they left them on buses and stores, blah, blah, blah. And they would send them to the school, and I would have them washed over and I would send them to the laundry so that students who didn't have them and needed them could have a lab coat and could start at the beginning of the year.
Wow.
In addition to that, the senior students were encouraged, the ones who were science orientated were encouraged to attend research sites. And those sites were basically housed in the Hawkins building, which is the building I would enter each day to check on the kids. And I simply knocked on doors. And when I found out who the researchers were and said, would you take a kid? These kids are interested in science, and they've been through the hospital program. And it was a wonderful response. The kids who were seniors and the better students, because you had to stay focused if you were a research student. You could not go to your site. And if you started a research program, you were expected to follow through. And we got some wonderful science projects because of that. And one in particular, I remember.
I'm sorry, Ms. Malbrough. I love your stories, but we are coming to the close, and I really want to get a few questions. So I'm gonna, and we have another panel that's coming up right after this one during our webinar, so you can continue to share these awesome stories. So please, our people who are watching, please don't leave us. We're still, this is continuing on for most of the day. So I want to thank our panelists. So thank you to Mr. Siegel. Thank you to Dr. Bloom. Thank you to Dr. Schumer. Thank you to Ms. Shirley Stark. And thank you to Ms. Edna Marlborough.